Okay, so Azure Purview with MIP integration. This was something that was asked for quite a lot by my partners and my audience. So I wanted to make sure we covered this at least to some level. It may not be as deep as you want it to be, in which case we ask you to follow up with us afterwards, and we'll talk about this in as much depth as you want to. This is really extending outside of privacy and seeing what else can we do now. We're deploying these technologies around the privacy view that we're focused on, but what else and why else should we do more with it, let's say. So the main point to make is an obvious one. If you've been in this industry for a while, data is exploding, but in a way that can be a little bit unhealthy for companies. If you take a look at a few of the examples in the industry of companies that have had any kind of breach, especially if we talk about not only data leakage and embarrassment, that's one of the key areas that's going to get you in the news pretty quickly. The other one is if you think about things like ransomware. So the ability that this information has exploded into places that you may or may not have full control of and didn't realize that that's what your business runs on, and without it, everything comes to a grinding halt. And with that, you now have to pay some ransomware or start working very quickly to recover the data. So data discovery, the ability to understand where it is, what are my people doing with it, and what should they and shouldn't they be doing with it, is starting to become now very top of mind for many companies. And that's why you see us bringing out so many different technologies and products and solutions that may or may not all tie together as well as you'd want them to, but they're there and they're available, and they're in one box now with Microsoft, as well as extended with our partner solutions. Let me take you back in time a little bit to my previous career, which used to be in the military. So my role when I was very young was to actually be a communications specialist in the Royal Navy in the UK. And I had to manually, physically stamp documents. That's the way we used to do it in the military, and I'm for sure they still do it today, because paper is king. In those days, it was easier for sensitive information to be identified because people who work with that information understand the sensitivity of it. And you would have a folder. So I'm just going to explain the basics on paperwork, because a lot of this comes back to how we do it digitally. You had a folder that it was stored in, so when it was transmitted from one place to another, it was clearly identified that the contents of this folder are, as you can see here, top secret. It may contain unclassified and lots of others, but the most sensitive information level we get to on this one is top secret. And as you're going to see with MIP, if you've ever dealt with it, you can have multiple levels of data inside of a document. You can only give it one classification, and it's generally going to, well, it is going to be the highest level one. The other part of that is that within inside of that folder, so folder we can think in these days, it could be Dropbox or it could be Amazon or anything across the Microsoft estate. It's data held somewhere. So we need to mark what the actual container is, whatever that is. Now it's a virtual container, a bigger folder than we can carry in our hands. And then within that, every single individual document, record, row in a database, etc., or column in a database needs to be marked as, is this one top secret, or is this one maybe a lesser classification? And that way we can understand how well we identify. As you can see here, stamping top and bottom with red ink. Color coding is helpful. So this all comes down to user education and training. So one of the first things you learn is how to handle it. And so the training aspects, when you think from a partner opportunities perspective, the reason why many of these projects don't work very well is because the company isn't ready to adopt the change in methodology. They're not taught and trained how to approach this thing carefully. And this is why much of our sensitive information gets in the wrong hands. Now, if you know it's the secret sauce to creating your entire company, it probably is well kept secret, but there's so many other things that should have been kept a secret that weren't. The other problem is this one, that you can't classify something too many different ways, because if you do, it adds to confusion. So something can't be copy and not copy. You can't have it as for your eyes only, warning, confidential. It's everything, right? And this is the confusion that's caused. So an MIP project is all about simplifying it, but you are adding a natural level of complexity because we have to. So the idea is to make sure that you can discover the data, anywhere, classify it, which isn't just about privacy, but about the sensitivity and things like regulatory confinement of that data, and then labeling it. And the labeling is one of the most important parts. If a company gets anywhere in a project, the discovery is the first thing they want to do. and they can spend months trying to decide how to do it or doing it. And then we're speeding that up now. Labeling, though, is one of the most important parts because labeling leads to actual control, putting controls in place to go, now I've identified what it is and tagged it with something. Now I can do something about it and put controls in place, which means we get to DLP, or data loss prevention. The outcomes in MIP are that if it's sensitive, then we want to put restrictions around it. Again, we might want to identify visually that it's controlled, or at least in the metadata, or maybe even encrypt the data. You can't do that with everything, so we're not going to go encrypting rows in a SQL database, maybe, if you can or can't. We're not going to necessarily do that, but you can choose what to do with it when the data is accessed or exported or marking data as it's entered. Retention policies is the really important one, especially when you think about the ransomware is looking to delete data or make data in such a way that you can't get access to it without asking for the keys. If you have a strong retention policy, doesn't matter what they do with malware, they're not going to be able to get in there and remove it, because even your administrators couldn't get in there. So even if they had global admins or domain admin rights, they're not going to go in and delete these or modify these records. So some basic things that we need to make sure companies are able to do by default, and especially for their most sensitive data. And that's the really important part, is a scope of this project shouldn't be to try to do everything, because that's a huge, I know we're all consultants and we want to make money and then we want to go do everything, but they can't afford to do everything straight away. So certainly it's about finding what's the most important stuff. And then the last one is monitoring. And this is really where Azure Purview is coming in, is we didn't have the ability before with MIP in order to do this across the rest of the estate. So MIP is Office 365, it is file servers, whether they're on-prem or in IaaS anywhere, and SharePoint servers. So now Azure Purview brings an extended set of capabilities to be able to do this across anything. MIP, to give you another view of this, was used in one of our previous sessions, but it's worth bringing back up here again. Microsoft Information Protection, in case you don't know the acronym, is the ability to, again, find data. Now, we have a whole bunch of out-of-the-box type of licensing, looking for credit cards and SSNs and things that are obvious. As a partner, your real role is to get in and help the customer understand what isn't in that box. A really good example that I have is that one of my customers named their oil wells exactly the same as a credit card. They didn't intend to do that, they just gave it a number, but the number matches everything that says it's a credit card, including the Lund test, the size and the length and what it starts with and ends with, just matched. So every single time we saw a document referencing an oil well, it came up as financial information around credit cards, and it just wasn't. So the false positive matching and the ability to do the learning, we've put trainable classifiers in. A lot of that is still only in MIP. So I'll give you fair warning now that not all of this is going to come naturally with Azure Purview straight away, but the intent is that over time we're going to see more and more capabilities come along. The sensitivity labels, don't get hung up too much on those. You will see companies that want to do 300 different types of labels, and you can do it, but you have to be very good at it. Office 365 is the natural place where that project will start because it's embedded into every single part of the product. And so that's really easy to get going with. And across all of Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, whatever devices they're using, they're going to be able to control this information. MCAS, don't forget about this gem of a hidden solution that most customers just don't understand. MCAS, and I'll stretch to say any of our partner solutions that have integrated with MIP, because there are other products out there that your customers may be using that are integrated with MIP and can do the same thing that MCAS can do. So if they have E5 or they've got MCAS, they should be deploying it from an MIP project. But if they chose another product and they're going to stick with that product and you're not going to fight against it with them, they can still integrate with MIP and get the most out of that product. AIP scanner, if anyone's run this project, again, this is deploying a server on site or where the file servers and the SharePoint servers are and scanning that data. Purview is for everything else. And then endpoint DLP is now available as well to protect and control the data in the place the user is using it. And then this is where Azure Purview comes out. This has only got a few examples like Azure and AWS. And as questions have come in the Q&A, we've seen, what about Dropbox? Today, you would use MCAS to do that. But we will look to having many different connectors and capabilities to extend Azure Purview and its strengths to go look at that data across those areas as well. That is the MIP story, and this leads into the Azure Purview story around data governance. So as we'll go into this demo and see that you can then use this, the data insights, the ability to find and catalog the data and understand it, and then label that content. Now we're labeling it within our catalog. Labeling content where it lives, actually in the metadata of the data, depends on the type of data that you're going to do that for. So documents, file types that support it can have metadata updated. Otherwise, it's going to be within this catalog, and the controls are, as a good example, is let's say we have data that's inside of 365. The data is then classified within 365. Somebody opens it up into something like Power BI. We're going to classify that within Power BI. If they export that to Excel, we're going to classify it in the Excel document. So even though the source data itself might have been in Azure, the fact that it was viewed and controlled and contained within Power BI and then used in another product in another way, we can follow that lineage all the way down and protect that data as it traverses across the business and into different viewpoints. So that's my very quick overview. I hope it covered MIP well enough so you get an understanding of it. If you want to go deeper on that, reach out to us and talk to us, and we'll happily go into a lot more detail with you. Here's some starting documentation. We'll share this in the Q&A chat window, so you can click on these links and copy and paste them, and you'll have access to this when we're finished recording. So with that, I'm now going to hand over to my friend Kevin, and he's going to take us through a demo of this. Over to you.
Thank you, Richard. Really appreciate it. So give me just 1 second, and I'll get my screen share up here. We're going to jump in real quick to the Azure Purview catalog. In this Purview catalog, we have we can see that we already have some files that are labeled. We have a Power BI data set that's labeled as secret, ADLS that's labeled as highly confidential. So we can see here on the side, Hawk kind of showed this a little bit in his demo as well, that we have different labels that are MIP labels that allow us to filter and be able to quickly find information that is labeled a certain way inside of our Purview catalog. But the question becomes, where do these labels really come from? I mean, I know we all know MIP, but I want to show that here, these are the same labels that we have configured within our Security and Compliance Center that allows us to then assign them to Purview assets. You can see here that these labels here have been enabled for Purview assets. Initially, there is a box here to allow you to turn on this integration. It's a one-time step that you just click it, and then it activates the labels within the environment. Then whenever you go in to edit the labels, it gives you the ability to add the additional Azure Purview assets to apply those labels to the unstructured data within the catalog. This very easy, and structured data within the catalog. This allows us to mark the files and the metadata within Purview. And here we can see that we have credit card numbers that are associated with this. And this is for the files that are being seen within like ADLS and blob storage, as well as AWS. And these can be labeled, but then after you've done that, you can also come in here and optionally label for database columns as well. So if you're not doing the labeling or auto labeling on your files, you can still do it for database columns. So if you wanted to just have a label to where it would look for things within your SQL databases, your Synapse, you could do that without having to enable it for your users for the files that are being seen within my other MIP applications. So once we've done that, we can come in here and we can see that we have the different labeled files, and we can browse through them very easily and click into here and be able to see that the different files are labeled in different ways. Here you see we have Power BI data sets. So Power BI allows us to do an inheritance of labels from the data source. So you can actually configure your labels in MIP and then enable them for Purview. And then when you bring in like a SQL data source, you can actually see in the SQL data source, it will label the credit card number, or in this case, label it as secret, because that's how I have it configured in MIP. And because this is labeled as secret, any downstream data set that is created. So here we have a data set that was created for product sales, and that is attached to that exact same database that I just showed. It is also labeled secret, and of course we can see that it's certified. But then we can switch to the reports. That same flow is coming down to the report where we can see that it has been marked as secret. And in fact, if we open that in Power BI, we can see that that secret label is continuing to follow the data and going all the way through from the initial data source down to Power BI. And the great thing about this is that it's not just going to label the Power BI report, but I'm sure you've seen that whenever you export data from a report that is labeled, in this case, the secret label is an encrypted label. So if we export this data to PowerPoint or PDF, I've done this ahead of time because that takes a minute or so, you can see that this file is protected by Microsoft Information Protection. And I'm able to view the permissions within Edge, and I can see that this is an encrypted file that has been exported from Power BI. And we get that full end-to-end MIP experience coming from all the way from the labels at the beginning, and then going all the way into Power BI and exporting to PDF. You can also see in here that we have these labels that are being marked on the data source itself. So you can see once we've scanned with Purview and then run some T-SQL commands to be able to marry that data to the data source, we can see that secret sensitivity label in Azure as well, underneath the data classification for SQL. So along with that, we can see in here the sensitivity labels within our Azure Purview Insights. This was shown by Hawk, and you can see that the insights allow you to see various different labels within the environment. And we can actually go to view more, and we can very quickly see files and tables that have been labeled with this type of data. And we can click through and get right back to that sorted catalog view where we can see the different data sources that have been labeled. So that's all I have to show for the labeling. Definitely, if you have any questions around that, please let us know, and we can definitely answer those.